The rhetorical situation of a text are all the elements that surround and influence the creation of the text. It's all the stuff influencing the writer when they sit down to write or stand up to speak. There are 6 elements of the rhetorical situation: the writer, the message, the audience, the context, the exigence, and the purpose. The writer is simply the person who utters, writes, or sponsors the text. It can be an individual or a group. When you're trying to determine who the writer of a text is, just ask yourself, who is trying to persuade? The message is the central idea the writer is communicating. It's the thesis of the text. When you're trying to identify the message, ask yourself, what is the writer trying to tell the audience? The best way to identify the message is to use your argument paraphrasing skills and ask yourself, what is the central claim the writer is making, and what are the primary reasons or pieces of evidence used to support that primary or central claim? The audience is the person or persons to whom the persuasion is directed. It can be an individual, a group of people, or a body like a company, an industry, a government body, etc. It can also be a type of person. When you're trying to identify who the audience of a text is, ask yourself, who is the speaker trying to persuade? And remember, with some texts, there may be multiple audiences that the speaker's trying to reach. The context is the time and place in which a text is created. It's also all the important issues, the social climate, the common attitudes and beliefs of the time and place. When you're trying to identify the context, ask yourself, when and where is the persuasion taking place, and what's going on during this time period? These first 4 elements of the rhetorical situation are often depicted using a model called the Aristotelian Triangle. And this is what the triangle looks like, with the writer, message, and audience represented by the 3 lines of the triangle, and context represented by a circle that hits all of the points on the triangle. The triangle model demonstrates that all of the elements, these 4 initial elements, are all interconnected. That's because who the writer is affects what their message will be, and who the audience is also affects what the writer's message will be. Also, who the audience is affects who the writer presents themselves to be. Context, that literal time and place the persuasion is occurring, that affects all of these things. When you analyze the rhetorical situation of a text, you should consider all of these relationships. In addition to identifying each individual element, you want to elaborate on how they relate to all the other elements. Let's take a look at an example of a persuasive text and its rhetorical situation. We'll look at Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Who is the speaker? Well, it's Martin Luther King Jr. And what's important about him within the rhetorical situation? Well, we know that he is a minister and a civil rights activist. He was considered a radical at this time period, and he was a wildly unpopular figure across much of America, especially among conservatives who felt that he threatened the racial and power balance that they had come to know and enjoy. What is Martin Luther King Jr.'s message? Well, if we paraphrase his thesis, it goes something like this. The people of the United States must continue to advocate for equal rights and treatment of Black Americans so that future generations can live in harmony. We also need to recognize that for this time and place, these ideas were considered radical by many people. Who is his audience? Well, first of all, there's the people who have gathered to hear him speak at the Lincoln Memorial. These individuals are mostly people who already agree with him, but are but want to hear his message so that they can be further inspired to continue his movement. Since this message is being broadcast to a wider audience, though, we have to ask ourselves, who is he trying to persuade? Well, he's trying to persuade people all across America who are maybe just satisfied with the way society currently is. People who perhaps believe that black people should not advance in American society, or maybe those who believe that change is impossible. He's also talking to the many white Americans who are anxious about living and working closely with black people. These people had been raised to believe black people inferior, and much of American society reinforced this belief through the various systems that promoted prejudice. Next, what is the context? Well, when identifying context, we have to first give the literal time and place. This was August 28th, 1963. The place he delivered the speech was at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., here in the United States. What was going on during the time period? Well, this was during the height of the Civil Rights Movement, and we also know that Martin Luther King Jr. was a prominent figure within that movement. Time to check your understanding. Identify the writer, message, audience, and context of John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity. Respond to the questions you see using complete sentences, and be sure to elaborate on each element as instructed.